Okay, thank you very much, Luc. Thank you very much for the good introduction. It's an honor for me to be with you today and be the first speaker of this session. So, very interesting topic, I need to say. And yeah, I try to tell you something what we are doing with EBA, the European Biogas Association in Brussels. What are the ongoing issues, topics, and what we need to do even in the future. So yeah, my name is Michael Niederbacher. I'm now since 4 years the vice president of EBA, representing the industry. And yeah, I'm working since more than 20 years in the AD sector and renewable gas sector, and as a constructor, and now as a developer in projects, renewable energy projects. So that's my background, very short. Um, and EBA in a nutshell, what are we doing? Let's say what we try to do is we want to scale up the production of biogases, but not only biogas, even all the renewable gases coming from biomass. We want to scale them up. We want to give them the right place in the renewable energies that they, let's say, that occur, that they are earning. And it's not always easy to explain what we are doing, and because we are so widespread with what we can do, and this is even the topic of this intervention, of this session, that we want to explain what are the positive externalities, not only energy but beyond. So as I told you, we have as an association, we have 8,000 stakeholders representing the whole biogas, or let's say the renewable gas chain in Europe, from biomass. And me especially, I'm representing the industry. I can tell you that I have been 11 years ago when we founded EBA in Germany. I have been present. Then a long time that we have been very small, but now since 3 years we got up from 50 companies. Then we have now more than 300 companies and 40 national associations. So we have now 15 or more than 15 people working in Brussels. And we have a lot of work to do, and we are very happy to do that. But it's not always very easy, as said. So the next slide, it's very, very important. What have we done? It was in the last year. I can tell you here a little bit the story. We have been invited by the cabinet of Franz Timmermans, and we were told what we can do, what is the potential of biomethane or the renewable gases out from biomass in the future. And we said, and we discussed a lot of this, because we said, okay, we need to be a little bit courageous to put really on the table what we can, but we cannot put too much, because then if you have targets that are unreachable, that's not very good for the sector. Then we said, okay, we can do 35 BCM until 2030. And people in the cabinet, they asked us why we cannot do 60 BCM, so nearly the double. And in the end, this was a very, very good sign, but we decided to keep the 35 BCM because this is doable. This is a target. You need only to say we have now 3.5 BCM, and we need to make 10 times more until 2030. And if we look at the calendar, 2030, we have it. It's not a very long time to do that. So I think it's reachable. The target is doable. It's a very good target, very good possibility to grow, but we need to put projects on the table. That's what we need to do in the future. This is the slide where we say, okay, until 2021, it comes from the EBA statistical report, is available if you want. You can only speak with the office. In 2021, we had nearly 15 BCM biogas. So to explain, biogas is to produce in the CHP electricity and heat. And we have 3.5 BCM of biomethane with nearly 20,000 plants altogether. and from then 1,000 plants to produce biomethane. So you see that the 35 ppm, what I told before, is 10 times more that we are doing now with biomethane. So it's really huge. What are the circumstances in the past? You can see here the feedstock type that we used in the past to grow the sector, to feed the fermenter, the plants. And you see the yellow color, these are energy crops. So some of you can say, okay, energy crops, that's an evil, that's very bad. But I can only remember maybe some of you that are my age or a little bit more, they can remember that we had the set aside in agriculture and the intervention price. And intervention was that we got incentives to buy the overproduction from the farmers, and then with other subsidies to export them to Africa, for example, to balance the production and the consumption, and set aside to reduce the production because farmers got paid not to produce, let's say, to leave incultivated the land. Both of these interventions that costs a lot of money. The biogas industry, especially biogas industry, we abolished these two interventions that the EU had to regulate the overproduction of the food and feed, and we use that for biogas. So a lot of people they don't even think about that anymore. But we have been the guys who saved a lot of money to the EU because we put this overproduction and put them into the AD plants. What we want to do now is change this narrative from energy crops. We want to change them to the resilience of food and feed production, because we always need to have a little bit overproduction in the future, because we cannot produce what we eat or what the animals eat. We always need to have an overproduction, and this overproduction, then we are using them in the AD plants, and then we have the production of food and feed more resilient. That's the new word that we need to be aware. We have a food and feed production more resilient than we had it in the past. So how we can do that? You see the RED 2 adoption, RED 2 implementation, RED 3 proposal. This is the Renewable Energy Directive. We are now in a phase where we are reviewing the Annex 9. Annex 9 is dedicated to define the feedstocks that we can use. Of course, we need to be sustainable. That's why we jump from energy crops to sustainable crops. That is the green color, and we can even increase the production. And with the green, we mean agricultural residues, we mean sequential cropping, we mean plant residues. So we have a huge potential without speaking of energy crops. So we always need to be food feed production, as said, and the energy crop is going in as a sequential cropping or in marginal agricultural land, etc. So that's what we see here. The driver is the greenhouse gas emission savings. So we are saving emissions with this, that we see later on in my speech. And the enabler, of course, tech development. So we need to develop a lot of new technologies, because the feedstock described here is more difficult to use in AD plants. This is now the number of plants that we have in the different countries. Of course, Germany is by far the biggest one. Then we have United Kingdom, but of course, France, where we are here in Nantes, France, it's at the moment is the market with the highest plants in production or plants in construction. But what we wanted to figure out is that now, for example, Italy has a new decree. It came out in November. We have now the application laws from January, and now this will become the fastest growing market for the next 3 years until mid of 2026. And if you can see that the potential that we have, Germany by far the highest, second one is France, and then we have Italy and of course Spain. So there is a huge potential that we have in Europe. We only need to unlock them. That's now what we EBA we want to do, explaining not only that we have the energy, but we have much more these positive externalities that we speak now in the coming slides. So beyond energy, circular economy and agroecological transition. What does this mean? You know, we have a lot of inputs. If I can tell you, we have a list of more than 200 feedstocks that we can use in the AD. There we are. That we have a huge possibility. We have huge potential, not only waste, not only sequential crops, but we have animal pie products. We have all the biomasses without wood, and the wood we can use in the gasification then to produce hydrogen or biomethane. But we have a lot of feedstocks that we can put in. And of course, we have then a lot of outputs, not only energy, electricity, heat, or biomethane or biofuels, but we have especially carbon dioxide that we can use in a process, and we have the digestate. I will explain this a little bit better. If we think about all the positive externalities that we have, of course, first of all, we have the management of the manure. So we are reducing emissions. So we are using manure and agricultural residues that at the moment are spread onto the field, are left into the field. We can use them, and then at the same time, we can produce digestate. Of course, number two, sequential cropping. If we have seen the potential before that we have, sequential cropping is by far the highest potential that we have to produce biomethane, biogas, biomethane. Third, we have the increase of organic soil matter and biodiversity. So let me say we have a lot of programs. For example, in Germany, Farbe ins Feld, colors into the fields, that we can crop a lot of different plants for the biogas industry that help the biodiversity, help the insects, etc., etc. But we can also increase the organic soil. So we are helping not only biodiversity, we are helping the soil health. And you know, the situation with the soil is a little bit tricky, is a little bit critical at the moment. So we need to jump into that. And let me say this, we have not so many experts for the soil. We would need to have much more experts that are dealing with soil biodiversity, soil and the healthy of the soil. Then fourth, we have the use of digestate, of course, and organic fertilizer. Many plants now are not spreading only the liquid digestate, they are separating, but then they produce, for example, pellets. And this is then we can substitute the Haber-Bosch, so the fossil intensive production of fertilizer. Five, we have the reduction of emission using the soil as a carbon sink. So we can put the digestate, use the photosynthesis to produce biomass put into the plant. The plant then is producing energy, but not only we produce then digestate or even biochar, for example. One of my next colleagues, they speak about biochar, and we can then increase the biochar into the compost or into the fertilizer, into the soil, and this is increasing heavily the health of the soil and even the micro and macronutrient storage into the soil. And last but not least, generation of renewable energy. This is what everybody think, but all the other points are, let's say, important the same. And it's always very difficult to put this on the screen and to describe this, as we need to make us understand what all we can do with biogas, biomethane. That's the challenge that we have to make us understand. Next slide, it's the digestate. Here we have a number, and apologize for that because we have now with the statistical report the first time that we have now the digestate into the statistical report. We have now 220, 260 million ton of digestate. We can already now displace or replace 5 to 6% of the Haber-Bosch nitrogen. And you know, 1 kilo of nitrogen, we put out more than 2 kilograms of CO2 and 17% of phosphorus. Phosphorus, you know, there are only 3 mines worldwide, 2 in the hand of only 1 land, that maybe you know. So we need to recover nutrient. The nutrient cycle is really crucial for the future of the agriculture in Europe. What we are doing then, of course, we have the digestate. A lot is only used directly, but it's becoming more and more interesting to produce pellets, to produce macronutrients, to extract them. And if I can give you this number, and sorry for that, but it should be 1 million tons. So at the moment we are substituting, looking only to the Haber-Bosch, we can avoid 0.6 BCM of natural gas. And calculating this, we have more than 1 million ton of CO2 that we can avoid only to substitute nitrogen from fossil fuels. So that's very, very, very important. What we can do then as next, we have the CO2. So we are producing CO2. Useless to say that direct air capture, etc. There are technologies on the market that can filter the air, take out CO2. But if I can tell you this, we have the biggest CO2 pump on Earth. That's the photosynthesis. If we are increasing photosynthesis and we are putting this biomass into AD, produce energy, and then produce fertilizer, then I think, and CO2, then I think this is the biggest CO2 recovery or filter machine that we can have. So that's there we have a huge potential. And today we calculated that we have 24 million tons of CO2 produced in the AD plants. 2030, with the 35 BCM biomethane, what we discussed before, we could have 46 million tons. And in 2050, with only 95, let's say only, but this is the lowest potential given by an institute, with 95 BCM of biomethane, we could have 124 million ton of CO2. There are other studies, they speak about 190 BCM. So we can even double this number with 250 million ton of CO2 each year that we could take out from the atmosphere only with using the biogenic CO2 that is produced with the biomethane in the fermenter. Then one of my last slides, fossil CO2 versus biogenic CO2. That's what I said before. We have the biggest CO2 pump on Earth. That's the photosynthesis with the help of all the plants, of the bioproducing biomass. And so useless to say that we have not only a substitution of the fossil carbon, but we have even a plant or a machine that we can produce carbon negative. Only to give you a number, if we have only manure and liquid or solid manure from cows or from animals, we can write we can have minus 270% of greenhouse gas savings. And this means with a car, we can say more than minus 170 gram per kilometer of CO2 savings. This sounds a little bit paradox, but it isn't, because we have now some projects for AD plants that they produce then biomethane or even hydrogen. If we would not use this biomethane or biohydrogen in the car, the plant wouldn't have built. So we can calculate the whole CO2 saving to the kilometers that's running the car. So we can write minus 170 gram per kilometer if the plant is fed only with manure from cow. Then the use of biogenic CO2, we only see a lot of times we only see the direct use. And let me say this, the consumption of CO2, pure CO2, I know it from Italy, is only 400,000 ton. And now we have 1/3 of this CO2 produced by AD plants, but then the 2/3 that now are used in Italy, for example, they are coming already from recycling plants, recycled CO2. So it's not gray or black, but it's even green. So the big potential we have in the conversion, we can produce biomethanol. I made a calculation. Worldwide, we have a consumption of 100 million ton of biomethanol. To produce this biomethanol, we would need 1 gigawatt of photovoltaic in a junction to produce hydrogen. With the CO2, we could then produce 4,000 ton of biomethanol with a 500 cubic meter biomethane plant. And this means that with 25,000 plants with 500 cubic meter of biomethane potential production, we could substitute the whole biomethanol needs what we have now on Earth with AD. And this is a sector hard to abate, but we could do that. So we need to have some frameworks from the political frameworks, but we as well, we need to put these projects on the table that politicians are aware what we can do. Then of course we have the conversion in chemicals, polymers, and other building materials, concrete, for example, cement. So there is a huge potential to do that. So last but not least, I have now to announce that we will have Valentine's Day. It's the 14th of February. It's next week. We will have this report launched. It's Beyond Energy. That's what we are discussing here. You can subscribe now immediately. We have already 500 participants. So if you want to hear that, that's from Guidehouse, a collaboration with EBA with us. So we have this other, let's say, report launched. So if you are interested, then please register and we would be very happy to have you in. So thank you very much for your attention. If there are any questions, I think in the end we have the session, so I will stay with you, and thank you very much.
Michael, can you hear me or?
I can hear you now, yes.
Oh, okay. So I see that you're connecting all the dots already yourself within the biogas sector. So that's great. My suggestion would be that we come back to with questions after all the speakers, so that we really connect all the things, that we're not going to go to the separate topics themselves, but having the discussions afterwards. So thanks again, Michael. And I now announce the next speaker, which is Harald BIER from the European Biochar Industry Consortium. I hope I pronounced it right, BIER. Okay. So I guess you will present on the point of view of biochar and how this connects to everything else. So giving you the word. You can stay or you can go.
I need this thing. Yes. So how would you like to see me, standing or sitting here? I can be here with the colleagues. Yes. So thanks for having me. I'm Harald from the European Biochar industry. We are the Biochar Association working on a European level, and I'll try not to connect all the dots, but just refer to certain points where we're working on, and then. But there are so many synergies to the other organizations. This, I think, we will try to focus on in the discussion then. So, I changed slides. So the first one, this is us, basically. Us is not the organization itself, not the staff, but we are many companies working on this topic. It's about 80 companies now. And together we're working on 4 key activities, which is policy, market intelligence, communication, and industry standards. We have started as a type of network, and now we're definitely going much stronger into the direction of policy work, which we judge highly important because it's a critical time. And if we set the right path now, we have the possibility to change the future for the better of all of us. And this is what we're aiming at. I will explain that in a second. Market intelligence, we are working on an annual market report. You can download it for free from our homepage and to see how biochar is developing in Europe. We do communication. Well, this year is also part of it, but We're also working on different topics in different medias, and we're working on industry standards together, especially with the EBC. You have CSI here also. They have a booth. They're the owner of the European Biochar certificate, which is a quality certificate for biochar. So, because not everything that's black is what we would call biochar or biocarbons. I want to start with a definition of biochar and PELKMANS, because one of them is the actual product in a stable, it's a stable form of carbon, and the other is a process of sequestering carbon from the atmosphere. Michael already said it really well. It's well, the biggest pump that we have, the easiest possibility to take out carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is photosynthesis. It works with the power of the sun, of which we have quite a bit on Earth. We can make use of this through the growth of biomass, and we carbonize this biomass as an industry. So for us, the product biochar, you might have heard of it. I just now, it's different than from 3 years ago. Now, if you talk about it, generally people tend to know. So it's a stable form of carbon that's obtained through a technical process. And it's a highly versatile material, and the versatility of this material is generally still rather unknown. So I will try to touch on that subject a little bit in the next slides. So it's used in agriculture, but also in different materials like construction materials, for example. And then pyrogenic carbon capture and storage, PICS, as we call it, describes the process of carbon sequestration. That means plant growth through photosynthesis takes out carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. It re-emits O2, oxygen, and it transforms the carbon into carbon bonds. We, through pyrolysis, stabilize those carbon bonds, and stabilizing means we make them inert for very long periods of time, thousands to millions of years. And through this process, we also generate heat, and we always, through this use, we suck out carbon from the atmosphere. And now, since 2019, it's also highlighted as a carbon sequestration method or carbon removal in the IPCC. This would be the process. Of course, biomass is a lot more variable, more flexible than what you see here. This is rather lignocellulosic biomass. We have a plant in the middle, a production facility. This produces energy in the form of heat, many times also electric energy. And we have a stable form of carbon, which is the biochar, or technical biocarbons, or engineered biocarbons, there are different terms for it, which also come with negative emissions. And just to give a glimpse into the possibilities of input materials, it's, for example, before you've seen from the EBA, from Michael, an elaboration of what they use as input materials. For us, as for pyrolysis, also their residues are a very valuable feedstock. So you can do methanization and aerobic digestion, and afterwards carbonize the residues, the solid fraction. There, for example, you get rid of microplastics and maybe PFAS or so, PAHs, problematic substances that can be contained in the feedstock, and that would be spread on fields. If they undergo carbonization, you make the carbon inert, so you stabilize the carbon, and you eliminate the problematic substances, basically everything but heavy metals, and a few of them also. So an example is sewage sludge. We have a position paper. I'm sorry, Donata, I didn't put the QR code on it. This is also something you can get from our homepage for free. So make use of it if you're into that topic. It's biochar-industry.com. And what we've shown is that from sewage sludge, it can be a really easy to handle material, but it can be a bit problematic also. You could eliminate basically all the organic pollutants like pharmaceuticals, pathogens, PFAS, PFOAs, PAHs, and microplastics. So we use lots of different input materials. And now on persistence in the atmosphere, this is what makes a carbon sink stable. So carbon removals have to be not only removed, but stored safely. And for biochar, the use is the storage. Like for CCS, if you pump it in geological formations, for biochar is if you use it, for example, in agriculture, where it cannot be taken out and oxidized, burnt, this material will just last and serve as a carbon sink. And there's new evidence that's being created as we speak. We just received more results just before this talk. So I'm happy to confirm that what I say here is seems to be true. We have analyzed a whole range of biochars from different input materials in different temperatures. And from what we have here, over 90% of the material in this biochar is inertinite. That means the most stable form of organic carbon that can be found in the upper Earth's crust. So it's the most stable form of carbon, basically. And this is apparently biochar looks like this. This is the formation of coal from a bituminous type of coal to the left, to anthracite, which is close to the stability of anthracite in the environment, is close to diamond. So it does not react with anything. It cannot be degraded by bacteria. And the biochar seems to be almost exactly like anthracite. It's measured through reflectance and through different state-of-the-art technologies. You will find that in papers very soon. So to applications, I said it's a very, very versatile material, and we have lots of science around the topic. From all the CDR technologies, biochar literature is the one who takes up the largest part. So basically, almost everything on CDR technologies that's scientifically studied is on biochar. 80% comes from the last 5 years. So be careful if you look at literature, you should look up the rather recent papers. That means also the applications are growing. We have lots of applications in agriculture. You can find enough online. We now have a growing market in urban applications, like urban trees, for example. They are suffering now with climate change. We can make them suffer a lot less, and also manage stormwater events like heavy rainfalls and so. So take the water into the built environment, into the urban trees and parks, filter it and provide it to trees. We also are working on construction materials. I think there's a missing image. It's different types of them, but they are coming in the next slides. So this is concrete, for example. This is, you might know, have seen this, at least one of those people here. It's Marcel Huber from Synkraft over there. We've been doing it with biocarbons, with concrete. It's a load-bearing concrete, and it turns out that this material is superior to the general concrete mix. So it's a stronger material, but we substituted 15% of cement with biochar, and that makes it better. So this is the idea. We create functional materials. Other colleagues here from the Italian Association, for example, are working on high-tech carbons, and that's also, for example, in the use of concrete. You could make bridges that detect cracks, because biochar actually is conductive. So before you have to see that the bridge is damaged, you would just find it out, and you can take care of take the measures that you need. So now it worked as well, so well that people are constructing parts of companies and constructions, and also family houses. This is the carbon footprint of the thing. I think I have to speed up. Carbon footprint, we are at a climate neutral. If you want to take the whole emissions and recarbonization into account, we're even in a climate positive environment there, with concrete, one of the largest polluters worldwide. Asphalt is basically the same thing, works quite well, doesn't take too much biochar to make it climate positive. And this is a wall cladding, for example, that's made out of over 85% of atmospheric carbon. through carbonization, biochar, and used with a bio-based filler, not filler, as a filler with a binder. This is 3D printing. I think it works. Yes, 3D printing with a biochar-based polymer, which also is it's a wonderful application. Also because in 3D printing you don't have waste. You just use the material that will be needed for the construction you're aiming at. So that's a part of the future applications, and all those applications work towards a growing market for biochar. This is what we have seen since 2013, 12-13. We have growth rates of 70 to 80%. Last year, it's not this year, it's last year, we've produced 40,000 tons, and it's not bio coal or anything that will be oxidized. It's really carbon conserving uses. It's 40,000 tons, which equals to 100,000 tons of CO2 equivalents, safely stored forever, basically. And this makes us the far most relevant carbon removal technology. So how do we scale this to climate relevance? And then I come to an end. If we continue to grow until 2026, we would be at 1 million tons of carbon removals, not avoidance. Avoidance, totally different thing. We avoid much more than that. This is solid carbon removals. And if we continue a bit more to 2030 with the same growth rates, we would be at 10 megatons, and then at 4 years later again at 100 million tons. Our goal is a bit similar to the potential. Well, potential is a bit similar to EBA's. It's 255 million tons, but this is carbon removed from the atmosphere that already was emitted. So that would be it. I also want to invite you, if you're interested in biochar, to our summit, which is taking place in June in Helsingborg, Sweden. It will be very nice. I hope we meet there. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you, Harald. I just have one clarifying question. Maybe. So if you have biomass as an input and biochar as an output, and also energy, how much of the carbon goes to biochar? How much is going to energy? Well, it depends, I guess.
It depends on the technology. It varies depending on how much energy you want to take out of the biomass. But it's between 20, and if you really want to take the most carbon out that you can, it would be about 70%.
Okay, thank you. So very interesting presentation, and I think we will hear a lot from biochar also in the next year. A lot is happening there. In terms of timing, I suggest that we go to the next speaker, which is Célia Sapart from CO2 Value Europe. Just checking, Célia, are you online?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes,
good
I
afternoon,
can hear you.
everyone. Yeah.
And now I can also see you. Yes, yes. Can you upload the presentation?
Yes. Do you see my presentation?
It's just, I guess it's coming.
Yeah, I'm sharing my screen.
Okay, it's there. So we see you, we hear you, and we see the presentation. So please go ahead.
Perfect. All good. Thank you very much, Luc, and good afternoon, everyone. I would like to apologize for not being able to join in person today. So I'm Célia Sapart. I'm the scientific director at CO2 Value Europe, and my role in the association, as I'm a climate scientist originally, is to make sure that what we do in the association does really play a role in terms of climate change mitigation. Today, I'm going to complement the discussions of the previous speakers and speak about carbon capture and utilization. So what can we do with the CO2 when it's emitted from biogenic emissions, also when it's emitting from fossil emissions? And first, I will say a few words about CO2 Value Europe. So we are the organization that represents the whole carbon capture and utilization community in Europe. And we bring together stakeholders from the complete CCU value chain across all types of industries. So we have upstream CO2 emitters, low carbon energy sources, raw materials and waste providers. And in the center, and this is our DNA, we have also conversion process, because we really work on CO2 conversion into different type of products. For example, chemical building blocks, synthetic or renewable fuels, and building materials. And downstream, we have everything related to infrastructures, refineries, distribution infrastructures, and everything related to the market for CCU products. So we are a membership-based organization. We have members from all over Europe and beyond, from different sectors, from large industries, research organization, and startup and technology developers, specialized SMEs, and also decarbonization clusters. We work around three main pillars. The first one is that we are creating a collective intelligence around the subject of CCU, not only on technologies, but also on who is doing what, and we are developing database in that sense. We support the innovation and the upscaling of CCU technologies in helping to build consortia and have access to private and public funding for CCU projects at the different technology readiness level scale. And we are also doing communication, and trying to raise awareness about CCU, and also advocacy to allow for the development of a favorable policy framework related to CCU, and I'm going to say a few words about it afterwards. And the main goal of our organization is to help the industry not only to reduce CO2 emissions, but also to move away from fossil fuel. Because it's very clear when we see the International Energy Agency reports, but also the IPCC reports, especially the last one, that it's not only about decarbonizing emissions when we speak about climate change mitigation, but it's above all about working on the cause, so defossilizing the economy, so being able to live in an economy with way less fossil carbon. And it's clear today that new investment on fossil carbon infrastructures are not compatible with reaching climate objectives. So this means that we need to develop at very large scale carbon energy sources that are not fossil, but also that we need to create alternative carbon feedstock. And this carbon feedstock can be CO2 or CO emitted from the industry. It can be biomass, as it has been presented before, or it can be coming from recycled plastic, so the solid part of the carbon. And it means that we need to create a circular carbon economy. Here I show you an image of the Renewable Carbon Initiative. And the principle of this initiative is to say that we should use renewable energy everywhere we can, everywhere where renewable electricity can be used directly. But there are some processes where we cannot reuse renewable electricity directly. And for example, we can create renewable fuels based on renewable electricity for the use that cannot use for the industry that cannot use electricity directly. So it means, in terms of carbon feedstock, as I said, that we can use the CO2, the biomass, or the solid carbon to make all the essential products that we need. So on our part, we really work on the CO2. So how can we use the CO2 as a non-fossil feedstock based on the concept of carbon capture and utilization? So we can use the CO2 or directly capture in the air, or captured at the flue gas of the industries, and convert the CO2 using low carbon or renewable energy into different type of products. We can convert CO2 into materials where CO2 is stored permanently, and I will explain how it works in a few slides. But we can also convert CO2 into renewable fuels, for example, e-methane, e-kerosene, etc., and also a huge range of different type of chemical building blocks. And CCU allows to reduce net CO2 emissions, but it also allows to avoid emissions, but also to remove CO2 when we take the CO2 from the atmosphere and we capture it permanently in building materials. And this is recognized by the IPCC report. So for the first time in the IPCC report assessment, for the assessment report number 6, so the one that was published last year on the climate change mitigation, so working group 3, CCU is discussed as a climate change mitigation solution. And why it was not discussed before? It's because CCU is a very complex concept, and the real impact of CCU highly depends, of course, on the type of technologies, but also on how it is used, the context, also the geographical context. So we cannot say, okay, CCU is good for this or is bad for that. We really need to study case per case the impact of CCU, and this is not easy to do because the it's again a very complex case per case. So we need to consider the 5 different steps here. So the source of CO2. So CO2 can be coming from the atmosphere or directly from the stack. It can be coming from fossil origin or from biogenic origin, as it was discussed before. And this will make a big difference when we consider the impact, because biogenic origin also means that the CO2 has been taken from the atmosphere before, while fossil origin, it means that the CO2 is really coming from the underground. So it's something that we are adding at the surface of the Earth. Then we need to consider the different type of capture, the direct air capture and the capture at point source, and also the capture related to microalgae cultivation. And then we have different type of utilization. The first part, which is related to mineralization or carbonation. So it's when CO2 is stored permanently in building materials, or we have different type of conversions, so thermochemical, electrochemical, photocatalytic conversions, and then the conversion that is also related to biology, so bioconversion. And it allows to make different type of material, as explained before, and the CCU, so the CO2 lifetime, or I can say the duration of the CO2 sequestered in the product differs as well. When we speak about mineralization, we speak about century time scale, and when we speak about other process, what the process we call power to X, we speak about months to decades. But it does not mean that it's not interesting and that it's not good, because the goal of CCU is not only to capture CO2 permanently in a product. It is the case when we speak about mineralization, but it's also to substitute fossil products such as fossil fuel. And it's what we speak about here when we speak about this type of conversions to make fuels and chemicals. So how does it work? So very simple scheme here. We use renewable electricity and water. We electrolyze the water to create hydrogen. And as it's very difficult to use hydrogen directly for most applications, because we do not have the infrastructure for it, we make this hydrogen react with the CO2 to create renewable fuels and chemicals. And these fuels and chemicals are interesting solutions because they are drop-in solutions and they can be used with existing infrastructures for storage, for usage as well, for example, in planes, etc. While hydrogen, again, will need really brand new infrastructures. So it's allowed to move away from fossil fuel. When we speak here about renewable fuels, it's allowed to facilitate renewable electricity uptake, storage, and transportation. So the idea is not to use this type of fuels in application where we can use renewable electricity directly. Of course not, because this will absolutely not be energy efficient. The idea is to use this type of fuels in sectors that are hard to abate and that cannot use renewable electricity directly. So we will use this renewable fuels in place of the fossil fuels. And it allows to reduce CO2 emission. How does it work? This is a scheme from a paper of us that will be published online tomorrow in the peer-reviewed scientific journal Joule. So here on the left, you see the panel showing the state of the business as usual. So we are burning fossil carbon, we are using it in the industry or in the transport, and we are emitting the CO2. The idea at first stage is to reduce the amount of fossil carbon extraction and use, and to capture the CO2 at the stack of the industry, to transform it into e-fuels using hydrogen and water and renewable electricity, and to use these fuels for hard-to-abate sectors, for the aviation and for the maritime sectors. And then here it means that we have 1 molecule of CO2 emitted in place of 2. So it means that we have a net CO2 emission reduction with this process. But on longer time scale, so we speak about a couple of decades then, the idea is to close the loop and to create net zero CO2 emission systems and to really move away from fossil fuel. So it means that we will use the CO2 from the hard-to-abate sectors when the CO2 cannot be avoided. We will capture it or directly at the stack, typically from a cement industry, who will always have, first we will always need some cement, and we will always have emission for such processes. So we take the CO2 from there, we make it react with hydrogen, we create fuels. And for example, it can feed back the cement industry if we make e-methane there. So it really allows to close the loop. But for other applications, especially for aviation, it will be very hard to capture CO2 directly on the plane. So we'll do direct air capture, Or we could also use biogenic CO2 again, because if we speak about biogenic CO2, it can be similar than direct air capture. So we use, for example, the CO2 that is coming from bioenergy or from the bio-based industry. And the CO2 react with hydrogen to make the e-fuels. So this is the idea, but it will not start next year. We can consider that it's the goal we are aiming to. If we look at the latest studies on the subject, we know that in near future, global CO2 utilization potential for fuels will be limited to 1 to 6 gigatons CO2 per year. So to remind you, right now we are emitting about 40 gigatons of CO2 per year. So this number is still small, but it can increase if we manage to develop a favorable policy framework, because right now it's not the technologies that are problematic, it's more the policy framework, because again, it's very complex, and my colleague today will speak about it in the next session. So we need to create this framework to allow for the upscaling of renewable fuels utilization based on CO2 utilization. But you will see that things are moving on quite fast lately, so this is quite encouraging. And if we speak about the chemical industry, so CO2 can also be used as a feedstock there, and we can create more or less all type of molecules we need in the chemical industry today. And we see that the potential there is also very interesting, because we could go up to 3.5 gigaton of CO2 equivalents in 2030. So based on what is in the last IPCC report, and also in the Caitlin study that dates back 3-4 years ago. So it's interesting to realize that also in this sector, we could go almost to use almost 10% of our CO2 emissions if we base on today's emissions. Another type of CCU process is carbon capture utilization in the building sector. So we call it the mineralization. So the idea is to use reactive waste, water and carbon dioxide emitted from an industry to create calcium carbonate, so all kind of aggregates and other materials that can substitute, for example, cement. So how does it work? So we use demolition waste, construction wastes, we make that are very rich in minerals, also rich in energy, and we make it react with CO2 that is dissolved in water under specific condition of pressure and temperature and humidity. And we manage to create this calcium carbonate that is today created in nature, but it takes a long time. So all the Jura mountains around here or the Ardennes in Belgium are made of that type of rock. It takes hundreds or even millions of years to do that, but now we manage to do that in containers, and it only takes a few minutes to create this type of aggregate. So it's a very interesting solution, and it allows to capture CO2 permanently, because the only way to release CO2 when it's under the shape of CaCO3 is to heat up, for example, the brick or whatever material you made out of it at 1,500 degrees Celsius. So it's very improbable that we will do that. And it's not only interesting for the CO2, but it also allows to reduce landfill, to reduce pressure on raw materials such as minerals, especially rare minerals. It also allows to store the CO2 permanently and to create stronger and more sustainable materials. So the idea here is to really create a double circularity process for the gas and for the waste, for the solid waste. And if we take all considered carbon capture technologies for mineralization that we know today, and if we consider them over the entire life cycle based on the current state of the art and today's energy mix, up to 1 gigaton per year of the cement market could be substituted by mineralization products. So this is quite a big number, and it could definitely allow to reduce also the carbon footprint of building material. And the first materials that have been made, first bricks that have been made out of that have been used in Ghent to create a pavement 3 years ago now. So we can walk on CO2 pavement there in Ghent in Belgium. So if to wrap up, what are the benefits and main opportunities related to CCU? But first, their CCU technology are drop-in solutions, and they have the potential to utilize up to 8 gigaton of CO2 per year. If we look at the current studies, scientific studies, and at the IPCC reports, It allows reduce or avoid CO2 emission, but it can also allow to remove CO2 from the air or using direct air capture or biogenic CO2. It also supports the indirect balancing of the energy system because it allows to store renewable energy when it's needed under the shape of hydrocarbons that can be used directly on existing infrastructure. It also allows to bring renewable energy to sectors that cannot use it directly. And it allows to defossilize the chemical energy and transport sector. And I think this is very important to remind. And it allows to increase circularity and reduce the demand on raw materials and to create a value, because what is interesting with CCU is that we create products that have a value. And the main challenges are related to the low availability of low carbon electricity, of course. So this is one of the biggest challenges. So we need to develop massively low carbon electricity systems, and CCU should help in that direction. The demand for water, minerals, and non-renewable materials should also always be considered when we speak about CCU technologies, because we do need water. So it's also important to think also where we put the CCU plants. Difficulties to assess risk perception and public acceptance on CCU, especially on the product. So how will the consumers consider the product made out of CO2? We see that people do not know CCU very well at the general public level. And sometimes they are fearing about CO2 that they consider as a pollutant. So we need to communicate in a very transparent way about this subject. There might be also conflicting expectation on CCU and its association or not with CCS, so the fact of carbon capture and storage, so the fact of capturing CO2 at the stack and storing it underground. This has a relatively negative acceptance from the public, and often CCU is mixed with CCS, so it can the negative acceptance on CCS can be brought to our CCU. So we should again be very transparent and explain the processes very clearly. And direct climate mitigation impact of CCU depends on numerous factors which are complicated to assess. And they are also one of the big challenges is the development of a favorable policy framework. So there are no, at the EU level, single instrument about CCU, but CCU is in many different instruments. I will not even read the slide here because my colleague Judy Bernier, who is Senior Policy Manager at CO2 Value Europe, is going to give a 20-minute talk after the session in the same room, so you can follow his talk on that. And if you are interested in knowing more about the different existing projects on CCU in Europe, feel free to have a look at our database or to contact us. And we also have a pavilion at the location now where you are, the CO2 Value Pavilion. Some of our members also are exhibiting, so feel free to go and speak to my colleagues. I'm sure they will be very welcoming. So I would like to thank you for your attention. And yeah, I give the floor to the next speaker.
Thank you, Célia. Very, very clear demonstration, and again, a topic where we can expect quite a lot, I think, in the coming years and the future. We have to go on because otherwise we're consuming our time. So I suggest we go directly to Jean-Marc JOSSART from Bioenergy Europe, checking if he's online.
Yes, I am.
Okay, Jean-Marc, can you hear us?
Yes,
okay,
I am.
We can hear you too.
Very good. So
And
I'm sharing
we're just waiting for...
Yeah, you should see my screen now.
Okay.
Do you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Very good.
We can see it and we can hear you well. So go ahead.
Excellent. Thank you, Luc. Again, apologies for not being present because of the strike, obviously. I will discuss about carbon dioxide removal, which is perfectly in line with what was said before, and especially the fact that biomass will play a key role in the carbon dioxide removal is an excellent news for us all. And I will speak today about the EU certification scheme that is under preparation. I will try to be quick so that you can have questions, Luc, for the audience. Bioenergy Europe is the voice of bioenergy in Europe. The European legislation is affecting more and more all of us at the member states level. So I don't need to convince you that the European legislation is important. So you can join our association, which is made of different associations and companies to represent the sector, and join different working groups. One of them, the last one on the right, is the Carbon Removal Working Group. Next meeting on the 4th of April, and observers are welcome. So if you want to just drop me an email, and you will be part of it. For the carbon removal, it's obvious that to reach the carbon neutrality, we will need it. Because according to all scenarios, we know that it's impossible to reduce completely the use of fossil fuels, and there will be anyway emissions from agriculture, for the cattle, for the NTO, for example, that are so that we need negative emissions. And you see there are different scenarios, and you see here the two main ones, which is the LULUCF, so the increased carbon stock in the forest and in agriculture, and another one which is really the negative emissions in red, that can be more or less important depending on the scenarios. And I think both the European institutions, the IEA, IPCC, they all recognize the key contribution of bioenergy. And as I said before, it's a good news, because bioenergy is so much criticized at the European level for the moment that it's a good news that for once they see a clear need for this. To give a certain standard for that, the Commission is making a proposal for a certification of the carbon removal. This was published in November. This is following the climate law. I will not go into the details now, but there was a communication before that on the sustainable carbon cycle. There is a link with the circular economy and other legislation. There's a link with the corporate social responsibility directive for the companies. This will provide more transparency. And also there is a link with the LULUCF, because the LULUCF, which is another important file, with a lot of discussions on this, but a target to increase the carbon sink in a forest by 300 million tons per year of carbon of CO2 has been decided. And this is criticized because, in fact, one of the consequences might be that we would have to reduce forest harvesting. So you can imagine that the forest owners are not happy with this, and we don't know what kind of impact it could have on the carbon materials made of the carbon if we reduce very much the harvest of our forest. These kind of slides is coming from the Commission. So the idea is to have a voluntary system that would accelerate the carbon removals, that would encourage the industries and the market players to use it, to avoid greenwashing, because indeed many companies are claiming that they are already on the way to be carbon neutral, but we have to believe in their methodology and calculation. So it's a mess. We have to admit that for the moment. The idea is also to quantify, monitor, verify these carbon removal, and to stimulate the financing of these solutions. So obviously, there are good reasons to develop this, and in fact, they have identified 3 ways to remove this carbon from the atmosphere. Either they go for what they call carbon farming. In other words, they increase the carbon in forest and agriculture. The second way is to permanently store this carbon below the sea or in the earth with CCS technologies or biochar. And the third one is the carbon storage in long-lasting products like wood houses, for example. The CCU and CCS are not in the scope of this, which is normal because it is not such a carbon removal technology. CCS is just helping to have neutrality for fossil fuels, but with Bioenergy, as we have seen before, we can reach negative emissions. So it's a good news that, and it's logic that the fossil fuels are not part of this certification system. The Commission has started to think about the criteria. They call it quality criteria for to be very quick on this, to quantify, to have additionality criteria compared to the business as usual. The fact that this is permanent or temporary is also important, as well as the sustainability. I will come to that later on. And the certification is the Commission will not reinvent the wheel with this. The operators can apply to a certification schemes that have to be approved by the Commission, just like the voluntary schemes that are existing for biofuels and solid biomass for the moment. These will be third-party schemes, so independent verification of the removal, and there will be a public registry for the certificates, so that this is transparent. So again, logic thing. This kind of certificates can be used for public or private funding of projects, for companies that would like to label their products. In the financial world, of course, you can imagine that there are CO2 markets that have already been developed for years. So this will be a way to define reliable CO2 credits, as well as for the voluntary markets as well. This kind of certification is under discussion for the moment. For the moment, as you could see in the step number 2 there is an expert group that has been decided very recently that is in charge of defining the methodology, because beyond the goal of this certification, the devil is in the details in the methodology. How do they count the temporary aspects or not? Storing a carbon in a forest is not the same as capturing the CO2 and bury this in the soil. And then the certification will start. So for information, there is an ongoing consultation on these proposals, with a deadline on the 21st of March. So those that are interested should answer this consultation, and Bioenergy Europe will obviously make a contribution to that. Last slide. What do we think about this as Bioenergy Europe? We think it's a good proposal. It's an excellent proposal. It's an opportunity for the bioenergy sector, definitely, and having a standard is welcome. It builds on existing legislation, so this sounds comprehensive proposals. It will address the methodology, as I mentioned, the permanence of this. The permanence of the storage and the type of storage are important. So the fossils are out, good news. There is some, obviously, in the discussion, and especially the methodology is not there. There is unclear points for the moment. What about the permanence? The roles of biochar, which is not really addressed properly. But the Association for Biochar might have certainly views on this. the procedures for the legislation is a bit unclear. There is an expert group, but we, by experience of the taxonomy, for example, regulations, we know that the experts groups are not always working well. There should be a dedicated act as well later on these methodologies. Another point is the voluntary aspects. Those that have the experience in EU legislation know that this always starts with a voluntary legislation, but then it becomes mandatory sooner or later, and we don't know exactly what will happen with this. Inequality, we have seen that there are sustainability aspects. We have already sustainability aspects in the Renewable Energy Directive. We really hope that they will not reinvent the wheel like they did for the taxonomy regulations. So we really hope they will have common sense with this. The link with ETS is unclear for the moment. What is it going to be a mandatory certification for ETS companies or not? Nothing is said about the carbon removals outside Europe. For the moment, it's typical that the companies are compensating their emissions with plantations somewhere in Africa or somewhere else. It's not covered for the moment. And there are also a lot of potential applications for incentives, market business models that are unclear for the moment for good reasons. But you see, it covers this really horizontal regulation. It will be a regulation at the end that could have many impacts. So thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much, Jean-Marc. You get applause. So also hope you also hear that. So I think also interesting here the developments on carbon removal, and we need to make sure that there are real removals. So I think that's a good progress also that we see. We immediately go to the next speaker, and we will come to the questions after the next speaker and see how much time we have. So I present you Christopher Sorensen. He's the CEO from GreenLab, and I think you're going to make a very interesting talk. So please go ahead.
I'll stand up to stretch a little bit. Do we have a clicker? Merci. So nice to be here. Thanks for the invitation. And all of the information, I keep taking notes because we try to use all of it, and we need all of it. And that's the good news. Our project is about learning by doing. So we don't have a bunch of papers to present. I can just show you some factories and some results and people operating things. And hopefully that'll come up soon. Because we have this thesis called Show It, Don't Tell It. So you're all invited to come up and take a look, make some learnings, give us some new inputs, and we can try to keep making it better. So I've timed this so that we have 4 minutes overview, and then we have 8 minutes on the material, how everything fits together, and then I'm done. And then we can get to the questions. So this is an actual site picture. You see a lot of windmills, also solar cells. There's a big biogas plant. There are 5 other different types of factories. So I'll just go quickly through those. We have a circular energy park. That means we have our own wind and solar park connected directly to the industrial cluster. So it's a direct green energy driven project. We build an infrastructure which is quite new. It's called a symbiosis net. So all the 4 sectors are integrated into one infrastructure. So water, gas, heat, and thermal energy. And we have research projects which are directly applied into the cluster. So we finance research, we finance scaling up, we finance the infrastructure, and then the factories, they get the benefit of that infrastructure. So that's the value chain of it. What we're trying to solve, industrial use of energy wastes about 2/3 of it. So every time we put some energy into our industries, about 2/3 goes somewhere else. That's pretty big waste of energy. So this is what we're trying to solve. How do we tackle a no waste thesis in the industry? And that's what we're trying to put into action. We do it by generating, storing, and then reapplying different forms of energy. So we can convert surplus electrical energy from our windmills into heat, put the heat into the industrial processes, and have a cascade of industrial heat processes all connected together, as one example. This is what it looks like in the diagram. So that picture you saw in the beginning, this is what it looks like functionally speaking. You can see all the different types of infrastructure connecting to different sites. This is the actual pictures. So from the left to the right, that's the wind and the biogas plants. We take an invasive form of starfish out of the fjords and turn them into protein. So that's a protein factory on the right-hand side. Down on the left, we have circular plastics, so pyrolysis of waste plastics, which usually go to landfill. Those go back to BASF in Germany, and they make new plastic out of that. So it's a circular plastic pyrolysis process. We have the biogas plant, and then right next to that, we have the pyrolysis of straw from the fields. In French, it's sueur. So after the harvest, you take the waste and you put it in the pyrolysis, and you get the biochar, which was well covered by my colleague here. A lot of applications for that. In our region, we use it for agriculture. So it goes back to the fields. And for example, the protein, we extract proteins from grass. So the biochar goes to the grass fields, more grass. We extract the proteins from the grass. The fibers from the grass go into the pyrolysis process, and they get more biochar back out again. Likewise, there comes a syngas out of the pyrolysis process. About 50% is converted to syngas. And you can see the pipes connecting what's called Sky Clean over to the biomass, the biogas plant. So we use the syngas to actually heat up the upgrading process where we separate CO2 from biogas. So the whole thing is symbiotic. And you'll see here on the bottom right is the P2X house. So we get our first module of electrolysis by April. We'll be commissioning that between now and the summer. And that'll be about 6 megawatts of electrolysis continuously running off of the windmills and the solar park. We will redistribute that hydrogen on site. And we'll get up very quickly to 124 megawatts of hydrogen. This is a diagram, and the real point of the diagram is not to memorize it all. It's number one, to show that hydrogen put in a scenario of a cluster is much more valuable than hydrogen going into a pipe. You get much more value on the other side. Look at all the products on the right-hand side. And that's from a P2X project in a sense. That's because we attach all of the different processes together. Those are all commercial contracts. It's not a demonstrator. It's actually just happening. So the reports about what we can achieve and how we can escalate that are all true because it can be done and it can be done commercially. So this is the 7.5-minute slide. It's just a scenario, but it's showing how everything fits together. So bear with me. This is a nice process, pyrolysis. You take the straw in, you get the biochar out, you get the syngas, the other side. We use it for heating, but when we scale it up, it's right now 2 megawatts. It'll be scaled up to 25 megawatts soon, and then we'll produce jet fuels using the green hydrogen from the P2X. That's a very nice process, and it's a negative carbon process. So we're capturing carbon, putting it into the ground. But if you take that very nice process and put it into an industrial context, what can you do with it? Well, the biochar goes to the fields. We have sandy soil out there, so it really helps the soil, enriches it, which means we can produce more grass. We extract protein from the grass. When we're done, we have a lot of fibers left. Those fibers go back into the pyrolysis process and create more biochar and more syngas. So right there, we're already doing a really good symbiosis. That protein is replacing soya imports. It's organic protein. We used to import to Denmark the soya from South America and China because they're non-GMO. Those are some of the last places you can do that. Well, now we can avoid that shipping in. We replace 90% of that imported soya, which means we're also changing the land use in South America and China where they cut down forests to plant soya. So there are very positive effects there. Attaching it to the biogas plant then. One thing coming out of the process of pyrolysis is a lot of heat. So a lot of waste heat. We're at 600 to 800 degrees Celsius, so a lot of waste heat. We apply that over in the biogas plant as well, and then we separate the CO2, and that can contribute to the fuels processing. But biogas also has, after digestate, a lot of fibers left over, which are just volume. It's just a waste product for biogas and for the farmers. That fiber can then go into the pyrolysis process again. So we have more fibers going into pyrolysis. It's not complicated when you go step by step. We need to get the green power from somewhere, so we have our own wind and solar park. And normally think that just goes straight into electrolysis and P2X, and then you're done. Hydrogen comes out, everybody's happy. But we also provide power to the industry. And when we have more wind and solar power than we can use at any one time, we can convert it into thermal power using molten salt and granite stones, up around 600 to 800 degrees of thermal energy, which then we can reapply into the industrial cluster. In particular, the protein site, they need 300 degrees to dry out the powder for the proteins to do animal feeds. Where does that energy come from? Well, it can come from surplus energy from wind and solar. Of course, the hydrogen goes into the fuel production, and we're producing green methanol in about 12 to 18 months as soon as that plant is finished. It matches the CO2 coming out of the biogas. That's all sold as shipping fuel today. So AP Møller Mærsk has already purchased pre-production all of the green methanol we can produce. The next step is to upgrade the syngas once we scale that up and create jet fuels. And there are already contracts for that as well. We just need to scale it up a little bit. But the hydrogen can also be used for other things. For example, you can put hydrogen into the reactors in the biogas and produce more biogas from the same materials. So it's just called hydrogen methanization. It's so simple, it doesn't get any simpler. Bubbles coming up through the reactor, more methane and it comes out of the top, and you separate it and pump it into the natural gas network. Plus we get more CO2 out the other side. So again, another circular process combining P2X and biogas. And finally, we will send some of that hydrogen over to the protein factory to replace the natural gas, which is used to dry out the material. So a lot of natural gas, 300 degrees temperature. We replace a lot of that using hydrogen instead. And luckily, we have a natural gas crisis in Europe. So that has really increased the prices, which means the hydrogen is even commercially viable at this point. So it's not even just doing it for society, it's because it's cheaper. So this is a good example of what's actually happening today and how you can create synergies and added value by connecting the dots, which is the topic of the session here today. That was the 7.5 minutes. I hope I hit the mark there. What do we do as GreenLab? We build the infrastructure. So we invest and develop all of the infrastructure, the storage, the wind, the solar. That's all paid for by our company with a public-private entity. And that means each of these segments can just plug and play. So if you want a P2X, plug it in, the water, the electricity, the gas handling, the district heating is all connected, all done, which means they save money and they get going faster. It just takes our risk to invest ahead of time so they can plug in and play. But so far, it's working out quite nicely. I mentioned we'll get to 120, 112 megawatts of hydrogen quite soon. And we have the potential to go to 400 and working with investors on doing that, which will drive more green growth on the site. And just to show how replication can assist, it's really a social development project. We started as a nonprofit, create green growth in an outlying area, use the energy on site to create growth for the people living there. So it's very much a COP27 theme. But you can see the investment here, 3 billion Danish kroner, that's about 250 million euros so far. The jobs, many hours of local work being created, and new jobs which weren't there before. It was just open green fields beforehand. We're at about 100 jobs now. It's obsolete every time I present it because there are about 15 or 20 jobs a month being created. So this is really a great social impact, green growth concept if you put things together in the right way and connect the dots. That was the conclusion.
Thanks very much, Christopher. I wish we had more time, but it's really a nice example of connecting the dots indeed. So we've seen different presentations, I think very interesting, all from their own point of view, which are also really future oriented and connecting things. I'm now opening the floor for questions. Maybe you're eager to have to put questions to either the two people here or the three people who are online. So are there any questions from the audience? Yeah. The microphone is coming. Yeah.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Natalia. I am from Institute of Circular and Hydrogen Economy of Ukraine. the countries that will be rebuilding soon, and we look forward for new technologies and whatever can be used to look forward, not backwards. My question is actually to almost to everybody who was speaking today about infrastructure, because yes, technologies is not a problem. In some cases, investment is not a problem. Policy, yes, but infrastructure, where the existing can be used, where it has to be modified, and where has it to be built from scratch. Thank you.
Okay, any one of you who's picking up? Okay.
Thanks for the question. And we're talking with the Ukraine about the rebuilding effort. We work with the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. So it's a great opportunity once we get past the crisis to look at how to rebuild. So we look forward to that. In our site, it's greenfield. So we had to do all of the infrastructure from scratch. And some of those you have to do anyway, like hydrogen infrastructure is different than natural gas because of the size of the molecules. There's controllers, sensors, all of that has to be done in a different way. But you can repurpose. We found, though, as we look out, now we work with harbors and combined heat and power plants and so forth. There's an advantage if you go to a harbor or a power plant because the infrastructure is already there. And then you can repurpose a lot of it. For example, in combined heat and power, you have huge boilers which can be repurposed as thermal storage rather than generating heat, and add some P2X. They usually have deep harbors associated with them for the materials coming in. So you can repurpose that, make a green fuels harbor out of that, and then using the electrical infrastructure to connect to localized renewable energy parks and bring those currents directly into a cluster model. So it gives good advantage to have some infrastructure to work with, because you can save hundreds of millions of euros just starting with something. And that would regard Ukraine as well. It's the infrastructure that's there at the harbors and the power plants can be repurposed towards these green industry clusters.
Okay, anybody else also online? We now have your faces up there also. Jean-Marc?
Yeah, I agree with what just has been said. For the biomass CCS, obviously the existing plants offer potential, and we have many medium-sized and large-sized biomass plants that have an interest in to add the CCS to capture the CO2 at the exhaust.
I think something is going wrong with the sound here.
Sorry.
Jean-Marc, are you still there?
Yes, I'm there. It should work. It should work. No, you don't hear me.
Hello, Jean-Marc. Or I think the others are also pretty stable.
Yeah, you don't hear me. I haven't changed anything to the settings.
We seem to have lost them, so let's hope that that they recover and come back soon. So we'll keep an eye on that. Did you want to say something, Harald, on this question, or?
I mean, I would also leave the floor open for other questions, but in regards to biochar, infrastructure is not really an issue. But then you can, of course, I was talking about synergies. We have lots of synergies. So if you would be working with hydrogen production, for example, there are different ways of producing it other than electrolysis, which would make, depending on the energy sources you have. And I also, in your case, it's different. But if you really build on hydrogen from electrolysis, I think you would need a lot more energy from renewable sources, because if you take what we have now, you have to substitute it by fossil sources. So it doesn't really add up. But then if you produce hydrogen, for example, from syngas, from a gasification unit, for example, then of course you have to transport it somehow, or you do it on site, on demand, which also is possible. So we don't always have to look on the transport infrastructure of H2, but I think in many cases it's also other products, pre-products that can be transported, or you make methane out of it and then you turn it into hydrogen. I think there are different options if you look at it from a more holistic point of view.
Okay, thank you. I'm looking at the time. Are there any more questions from the audience apart from that? So you're connecting the dots. I don't think we have the online speakers anymore, so something went wrong with the connection. So if not, I think I can close the session because we have to close in 4 minutes from now. So I think we've done quite well. So as mentioned, we had very interesting presentations on the multifunctionality of biogas, on the promises from Biochar, on I think also CCU sounds very promising, and also on the carbon removals, and then the case really where you put in practice on connecting the dots. I think that's really a very important aspect, I think, or a topic that we see. We can have a lot of ideas of, yeah, we have to work together, but making it work in practice is really, and showing it and demonstrating, I think that's really a key thing. And that's I hope in this conference and this expo that such projects also can grow, and initiatives can grow from that. So thanks again to all the speakers. Thank to the audience, and I see they're moving again. Are you okay? Okay, sorry for some of the connection problems, and I hope that you were able to follow the rest of the session from your side. So thanks again, thanks to the audience, and I wish you a pleasant rest of the conference. Thank you.
Bye-bye.